This is more fake news. Literally in the last 24 hours, you took Stephanie Grisham out of context. You take the president out of context.
I'm not taking anybody out of context.
MSNBC lies about the president and our campaign manager. This is why Harvard, by the way, says 90% of the news coverage of the president is negative. Not my words, Harvard's words.
No, that's not what Harvard said. Harvard said 90% of the coverage is negative. They didn't say why.
I'm asking you about the president. You said you asked why I was asking about the president. I'm asking about the president because you work for the president. Yes. I guess the question is more specific.
The president about 10 minutes ago tweeted about vote by mail absentee voting. He says in Florida the election system is safe and secure, tried and true. What, in his view, changed? Was he advised by Republicans that he was potentially suppressing his own vote by stoking unfounded fears about mail-in voting? And will he admit now what is the fact that voting across the country by mail is safe and secure and tried and true?
Well, the president has always said that absentee voting for a reason is different than mass mail-out voting like what Nevada is seeking to do, which leads to mass fraud with delay, and that is what the president stands firmly against. He wants a free and fair election.
Extensive research shows that there is fraud in vote-by-mail systems is extraordinarily rare. The president votes by mail, you vote by mail, and a dozen other top Trump administration officials vote by mail.
So with regard to the absentee system, that's right. And there is ample evidence of fraud. I would point to you the best example of this, and very recent, was May 12th, New Jersey's special election in Paterson, New Jersey, where 1 in 5 mail-in ballots were found to be fraudulent in the election. New Jersey officials were charged in that case, and resident Ramona Javier said this is corruption, this is fraud. There are 8 relatives and immediate neighbors she knows of listed as having voted, but who insist they never even received a ballot. There are ample examples of fraud, and we can get those to you more than just Paterson, New Jersey.
There's violence across the whole country. Do you disavow the violence from Antifa that's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
About Antifa in Portland?
Yes.
Sir, there's videos everywhere online. There's fires and riots. They're throwing fireworks at federal officers. DHS is there. Look online. It gets crazy, Mr. Nadler.
Kayleigh? It's appalling. Ask the 3 officers in Portland who were blinded by lasers, literally will very likely never regain their sight because of Antifa. Ask them if it's a myth. Ask the federal officer who stuck his hand through boards with nails left out by protesters if it's a myth. Ask the officers who were in the courthouse as Antifa tried to burn it down. This is not a myth, and it's disrespectful to our federal law enforcement officers who are out there trying to protect the courthouse and protect the American people and protect peaceful protesters from the Antifa rioters.
But Kayleigh, Joe Biden says he's warning the president, you must allow the vaccine development process to play out free of political pressure and follow the 3 principles of integrity. Your thoughts on the warning from the former vice president?
No, in fact, you had Dr. Anthony Fauci out on the air yesterday touting this historic timeline and noting that this has been done in complete sync with the science, and we've been abiding by the standards for clinical trials. So perhaps he should go talk to Dr. Fauci.
Yes. Are you calling on me? Can I please go?
Yes.
Israel reopens. Israel opened schools, and they had issues with that. There were outbreaks. Students got sick. What do you think of the fact that Israel opened schools and had to close?
I called on you and you didn't ask your question, so then I proceeded
to speak over another reporter. I wasn't going to do that. Andrew. So do you not want to answer my question now that I was not being rude to another reporter?
Go ahead, Andrew. Yes.
Thanks for calling on me. I wanted to give my question over to you, Nish.
Sure, that's fine.
Thanks so much. So my question is, I have 2 questions. The first question is, Israel opened its schools back up. They thought they had the virus under control. That virus then spread and it became an outbreak. Students got sick. They had to close schools down. How worried are you that what happened in Israel might happen here, given the fact that there are experts in Israel who say they made a mistake there?
Well, I would refer to our experts, and CDC Director Robert Redfield answered about schools on the Hill last week, and he said this: I don't think I can emphasize it enough as the director of the Center for Disease Control, the leading public health agency in the world. It is in the public health interest that these K-12 students get back to schools that are open for face-to-face learning. I want these kids back in school. It is paramount to the health of the child.
president just tweeted, to you answer a question about this, mail-in voting or absentee voting, whatever you call it. He's saying that essentially it's the same thing. So why is it now something that can be done in Florida but not in other states? Why is that the appropriate thing to do?
Can they first apologize for the years' worth of lies and conspiracy theories on Russia before we work with people that are unwilling to tell the truth themselves and don't retract and apologize?
That's exactly right. Instead of retracting those stories, they won Pulitzers of those stories at the Washington Post and the New York Times for lying about the witch hunt against the President of the United States. They were dead wrong, but they don't apologize. They don't give back the Pulitzers as they should. What's so egregious about this, Sean, and particularly with the Tom Cotton op-ed, we use the briefings and we highlight people whose names are not mentioned in many mainstream publications, like David Dorn, the police officer who lost his life in the riots. And how ironic that the New York Times, rather than highlighting this tragic story that deserved attention, they instead censor a piece that mentions and talks about the violence in the riots. And that, of course, is Senator Tom Cotton's op-ed. It's really egregious. And that's what drives them nuts, Sean. You have the Democrats who engage in basket of deplorable politics, like Hillary Clinton. We're all in the basket of deplorables. And you have the Washington Post saying, oh, it's actually more than half of the country, that half of Trump supporters that are in the basket of deplorables. And you have the media doing the bidding work of the left. And it drives them nuts that this president worked around them, spoke directly to the American people, more than 200 million followers, and that direct connection to the American people is what perturbs them and drives them to be even more insane in their coverage of this president. This testimony by our doctors to just acknowledge the real successes and work of this administration. I acknowledged the ventilators, and I talked about testing and just great American industry coming together, the American people coming together and working to get us through this tragic pandemic. And we grieve when even one life is lost. But I do want to point out just the early actions of this administration. When there were 0 reported cases in the United States on January 6th, the CDC issued Wuhan travel notice before any U.S. confirmed cases. But what were Pelosi and Chuck Schumer doing? They were calling on the GOP to support Bolton testifying. 0 reported cases in the United States on January 17th. The CDC implements public health entry screenings at 3 major U.S. airports receiving the greatest volume of Wuhan passengers. What were Democrats doing? Oh, House Democrats were preparing to file their first brief in the sham impeachment inquiry. When there was 1 reported case in the United States on January 21st, CDC activated Emergency Operations Center. What were Democrats doing? Oh, Chuck Schumer was calling for witnesses in the impeachment trial, and Pelosi released a statement criticizing Mitch McConnell for his trial rules. And finally, when there were 7 reported cases in the United States on January 31st, President Trump issued travel restrictions on China and the first mandatory quarantine in more than 50 years. And those travel restrictions saved American lives. But what were Democrats doing? Pelosi was introducing the No Ban Act, which would have imposed undue limitations on the president's authority to restrict entry of aliens into the United States. And what are Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi doing now? Stopping Americans from getting their unemployment insurance. And it's despicable, and it's time for them to come to the negotiating table. Thank you very much. You had LA Mayor Eric Garcetti proposing a cut of $150 million from the LAPD. LA Mayor Garcetti said this: it starts someplace, and we have to say we are going to be who we want to be, or we're going to continue being the killers that we are, was his quote in support of the defund movement. And as a result, we saw a 14% rise in homicides this year over last year. In Minneapolis, the defund the police movement was afoot as well, with a unanimous vote in Minneapolis City and their council to dismantle the police. And you had Minneapolis City Council member Jeremiah Ellison saying this is one action of many that we need to take on the road to a more equitable and just system that keeps people safe. In fact, it did not keep people safe. We've seen a 94% increase in homicides compared to last year in Minneapolis. And then finally in New York City, defund the police. You had the New York City Council voting to cut police budget by $1 billion. You had Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying defund the police means defunding the police. It does not mean budget tricks or funny math, so it wasn't enough for AOC. But you did have New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio saying we think it's the right thing to do. It was absolutely not the right thing to do, as we've seen a 177% increase in shootings from July 2019 in New York. When you defund the police, there are consequences, and that's where the Democrats of today stand. And unfortunately, we've seen a corresponding rise in violence in these Democrat cities, and it's not acceptable. Thank you very much, and you'll see the president at 5:30.
Welcome to my house, baby.